You're listening to The Big Conversation.
Brought to you by the Cheshire and Merseyside Resilience Hub.
Joined by special guest, Lawrence Howard.
On today's episode, we're joined by Lawrence Howard. Lawrence is the mental health advisor for Cheshire Fire Rescue Service. Hey Lawrence, great to have you on board. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Good to see you.
And you too. So we've previously met and we've linked together when the Resilience Hub came to your mental health conference to let staff members know about what help and support they can get. Now that does seem like a lifetime ago. It was a while. So on that note, why don't you tell our listeners what it is you do within your role and who you are?
Okay, well, as you know, I'm Lawrence. I've been working in mental health for quite a long time, so I've got a range of experience, and I had the opportunity in that experience to make contact with all the emergency services at some point through joint working. And a few years ago, the new chief, when he came to Cheshire, Mark wanted to promote mental health and was aware that it was a growing agenda. So he went to the staff and said, look, how should we do this? And to cut a number of conversations short, what was decided and really suggested by staff was that they have a person, a role that supported mental health exclusively. And they modelled the role on a role they already had for physical health. So what they looked at was, well, we spend time providing physical fitness assessments and training for people for their physical health. Why don't we do the same for mental health? So the Fire Authority approved that and they went out looking for someone. So for me, it was a great opportunity because, as people are aware in the health service, the more experienced you get and the more skills you acquire, sometimes you're forced down stepping away more and more from clinical involvement. And I really miss that. So what attracted me was those two things: previous contact with the emergency services and the regard I had for them. And secondly, that opportunity to get back to maybe being in a position where you could see a tangible change. And again, I think something in the NHS was difficult, was it just seemed to be so big and it was really hard sometimes to get your head around what you were achieving. So when I saw the advert, I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. And fortunately, they gave me the job. So what was interesting was they weren't too clear as to what they wanted, which was great for me. So the first 3 months were really just going out and meeting people and talking to all levels of the service about how they saw the role. And what transpired was they wanted it focused within the organisation. So whilst they accepted there needed to be partnership working and linking up with people like yourselves and interagency working, they wanted to build something within the service that provided real daytime support for all the staff, both operational and non-operational.
Yeah.
And that was to acknowledge that, say, for example, even someone in fire control hears things and experiences things that can be distressing and can be a challenge, and not to forget that it's not just frontline firefighters who have that exposure. So it was really good, and really that's my role. And within that, obviously, there's an element of training, of linking with outside support, but also generating peer support within the service. And I have no doubt we'll talk a bit more about that later, but that's the context. So that's my role, just to be in the service, encourage people to support each other, and then put things in place that make that happen.
Yeah,
and I've waffled on enough with that.
No, I think it's really insightful from when you were saying, say about the charter, if you would, the start when you had the physical stuff, then you physical and mental always go together because
Yeah.
you can't have one without the other. So I think it's really interesting, and you say that because coming into a position very much like yourselves, I'm like this within my role, and it's kind of like having the freedom to work with the people round table events, for example, getting people together and saying, what is it you want? Because I think very much like organizational aspects, doing for people doesn't represent doing to people or doing with people, for example.
Mm.
And I think it's quite insightful because I suppose, much like any other organization, mental health is one of the biggest aspects that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I think as a person, like you've just touched on it there, it's not just the front line, the firefighters, it's the call center staff. It could be a cleaner, it could be the CEO, it could be it's everything, isn't it? And I think
Yeah.
we all experience like say challenging feelings, for example, from time to time. And it's kind of what makes us human, kind of what makes us tick. Because I know we all get affected by things in different ways. So what could be, for example, water off one person's bike could be something that sticks with other people for a lifetime. So it's about including them and saying what is it the support that you need and bringing people together to alleviate pressures on some core services. Um, well, with that and mental health in mind, I wanted to touch on why is it important to like reach out. What are your thoughts around this?
Well, I think in one way, we're quite fortunate in that over the recent years, more and more people are becoming aware of mental health issues.
Yeah.
So the general population is being encouraged to reach out.
Yeah.
And we've had high profile people bearing witness. The fact that um, last year we linked with the Royal Foundation, with William and Kate's charity and Mind, and were part of that Blue Light Together.
Yeah.
We were used as an example of good practice in terms of our mental health strategy, which is an organisational thing, but it was about the message that in emergency services, you do need a structure, you do need to be challenging the organisation, and you need to be working towards a culture change where
Absolutely.
it's safe to reach out. And not everybody, as in society, but also in services, um, that can be scary, difficult to do. So um, it always struck me, um, and forgive me doing this, but my nan always used to say to me, Lawrence, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah.
And
It's true.
oh, yeah, and on occasions I thought, well, really, that's the start of good mental health. And maybe she was a bit smarter than I thought she was, in that, you know, reaching out is around sharing the issue.
Yeah.
And immediately you do that, you take some of the power away from it. So really that comes back to why we support Time to Talk and we do other things. And when we go to staff, we say, what do you want that will make it easier for you to reach out, but also for your colleagues to reach out to you.
Yeah.
So we're quite big on peer support. Um, one, because we need it in the roles that people have.
Yeah.
That's the way they work. Everyone knows their job and what they've got to do, and they do totally rely on their colleagues.
Yeah.
Literally put their lives in their colleagues' hands when they're in certain scenarios. So they need that trust. And what we wanted to do really was to try and get that level of trust around mental health.
Yeah.
And this may sound strange, but for some reason, people can give that total life commitment in terms of reaching out and working together and talking about what they're doing. But the minute you put it in a mental health context, it suddenly, I don't know what it takes on, but it just suddenly appears to be so difficult.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is to break that down and say, look, just as you work together and depend on each other, you can reach out to each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to do that because unlike the general population, and this applies, to all of the emergency services,
Yeah,
we put our staff on our behalf into scenarios that most people won't come across, hopefully more than once in their life, if that.
yeah,
So on a daily basis, we're saying to people, your day job is to go into scenarios that might be stressful. The working conditions might be such that you have to perform under pressure and in what could potentially be for you a life-threatening scenario.
yeah, for sure.
And we expect you, as your day job, to do that every day.
Yeah,
And not to acknowledge that maybe we're asking quite a lot, or to acknowledge that it may have an impact. It seems surreal not to get that if you're going to put people in difficult scenarios, it's going to have an impact.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and in terms of detail, we know that that sort of exposure can stay with people. And we've put things in place to think about that. But I mean, a number of years ago, I had links with the military when we were seeing people, and I'm going to show my age now, but sort of Falklands, Bosnia, those sorts of conflict. And we even came across people who'd been involved in Northern Ireland. And it was something like 15 years before people were given a diagnosis of PTSD. And it was that gap between and all the coping mechanism or inappropriate coping mechanisms that people had used. So you found people using substances,
Yeah,
having anger issues, ending relationships because of behaviours.
yeah,
A large percentage ended up in the criminal justice system because of the anger issues. And people would lose homes and families.
yeah,
And only after a very long period of time did it become obvious that PTSD was an issue. And I think in emergency services, it took them quite a while to get their head around the fact that potentially we're going to be in the same position.
mm,
So for us, we really see it as our major duty of care to make sure, if we can, that people get support at the front end
yeah,
and early on, so we don't leave people to be in those situations where maybe things go undiagnosed or unsupported, and all those negative consequences ripple out and add to the problem.
I think
So
that's it. It's that concept there where you're saying it's essentially prevention's better than cure. And like you said, on the previous stuff that you've experienced, for example, it's back in a generational concept. So bringing it to an organizational aspect, people didn't talk about this, and it just manifested and grew and developed. And like you said, it led to negative aspects within their life, like losing the home or the families. And I think it's one of the biggest factors is just as people now in today's world, we can talk about this and we can actually address the problems of a historical caseload, for example, and say to people, let's not get back to that position, let's not be there again, type of thing. Think, sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to agree with you, Ian, and say I think one of the things I've noticed in my time with the service is there's that change is there, that people are very conscious now
Yeah,
of the long-term effects of things. And
this is it.
so in one sense, um, I said to a group of colleagues, because they said how when I first, about first 6 months, said, how have you found it? And I said, well, really, it's been like pushing against an open door, because one of the things that struck me was people were open and were aware that long-term stressors weren't good for you.
No,
And
I
so there
think
was a willingness to engage and to do something about it.
that's the aspect, isn't it? It's about the willingness to actively engage people and say it's okay to not be okay type of thing. And we hear a lot of buzzwords filed around, like in terms of reaching out, it's okay, and but actually it's meaningful. It's just saying to people, if you're struggling, we've got a shoulder type of thing. And I totally hear you in terms of what you were saying about the responsiveness, if you would, because very much like yourselves in the fire service, it's the same for us in the NHS, and it's not a one shoe fits all approach with mental health, because mental health is such a huge spectrum, and one little thing could have a big impact with somebody. And I think, for example, as firefighters, and as support staff, you're expected to be calm, level-headed, and to be able to face the most of, say, challenging situations. And that's very much like us in the NHS. Say, it could be the A&E team, but it's not just the A&E team. It's also the receptionists who are having to deal with it, the medical administrators who are looking into all of this, and they see stuff on a daily basis. So it's kind of a knock-on effect, isn't it? Like you said, that ripple effect, and you want to stop that in its tracks early on before it gets to something and manifests to something bigger. Like I was recently looking into, say, some research around mental health within the blue light family, and there was lots of information I pulled out, and it struck me for the fire service alone that 65% of respondents have said that they struggle with memories of difficult calls, and that like 59% of people have had family issues as a result of the job. And I think that's one of the biggest aspects around reaching out, like like we've just discussed. But I think with that being said, there's also still people within service lines who are actually still reluctant to reach out. And I think this is the role of people like yourselves, our service, coming together and saying it's a hand-in-hand approach. I think from your point of view, what would your message be to people going through a tough time who are reluctant to speak up?
It's good to talk, as they say, and that sounds very simple, but um, going back to my grandma, you know, it's a bit of a sort of truism, isn't it? That when we talk and share issues, um, it takes the internal pressure off, but it also means in reaching out, um, people can come in and be a support to us. But you're right, there's still that reluctance, and I think that's a hard thing to change. A culture where even people wouldn't like to admit it, there's still a bit of a stigma about mental health. There's still that sort of man approach.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
we, we know men generally are reluctant to come forward and seek support and go down other routes. And it's no different in the emergency services and certainly in the fire service, even though there's an understanding that what they do can have an impact. I think for some people it takes tremendous bravery, tremendous courage to
Yeah,
acknowledge that and battle against those perceptions of stigma and what my colleagues might think about me. They're going to think I'm weak. Um,
absolutely.
Simply because, as we were saying earlier, if you're part of a team where people depend on you, you don't want to give your colleagues the impression they can't,
Yeah,
and you might put them at risk. So, there are a lot of inhibitors for people reaching out and talking. And that's why we just, as one or two of my colleagues have told me, Lawrence, you go on and on about it, but we do as a service. We just say, you know, whatever you think or feel people's perception might be,
yeah,
we're here for you, and you can reach out. And I suppose we've also acknowledged that for people that can be quite difficult.
yeah,
So what we've tried to do in the service is to create a network of things, a bit like a spider's web, really,
yeah,
where part of that web is a series of routes into support,
yeah,
both formally and informally. So, just simple, not quite simple things, but straightforward things like we have a group called Fire Pride, and it's for our LGBT colleagues and friends, and they have allies, and it's something we promote within the service to be inclusive. But what we're also hoping is that if there are people we can identify with, it might make it a bit easier that if I'm struggling, I'm in a group of like-minded people.
Yeah.
And
Same,
having done, sorry.
Same, but different type of thing.
Yeah. So, we've got Fire Pride and the allies, and again, for the service, that sort of inclusion is really important. And the fact that, the work we do, Stonewall recognised it, we're second in the top 100 services or organisations in terms of the index. So we do talk a lot about being inclusive, which is one of our sort of core values.
Yeah.
So we also have a desire to increase the number of women involved in the service. Yeah. To be truly representative, and we've made big strides with that. I suppose we're about 2/3 male, 1/3 female. We want that to increase. So we have strategies in place to do that. But we also have an organisation internally for females in the fire service called Limitless. And really, it's the same principle where women can identify, support each other. And it's been a really positive things for the service. So just simple things like hygiene packs on fire pumps.
Yeah.
Just little changes when we're looking at a piece of uniform, acknowledging the obvious things that men and women are different shapes. Yeah. Whereas before, it was one size fitted all, literally.
Yeah, that's it.
Whereas now they've been able to have input into the different needs, different materials. We were one of the first fire service to have a menopause policy. Yeah. And on the back of that, it was really interesting that when we were looking at recommissioning our uniform and non-dress uniform, there was a lot of input from women of certain ages around the material wasn't appropriate. It was too hot, didn't fit the setting for their work. So it engages people, but what it also means is they do a lot of mentoring and peer support, and but they've come together through issues that unite them.
Oh, absolutely.
And I suppose I'm just rattling on about a number of things that we've put in place, but we've also, we're part of the Asian Fire Association. So internally, we've got a branch of that, which we call REACH, which is around ethnic minorities and diverse faiths, etc. Yeah. And again, it's a way of trying to raise those issues and support those issues and educate people, but also that like-minded approach. And luckily this year we're gonna host the ASFA conference in Cheshire this year, which is a national conference. But again, it's all around saying, you are welcome, you are included, but it might be a route that you feel comfortable going through to get support if you need it.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, as being part of that group, you won't meet prejudice or discrimination in outside context. So we've got other things, we've got a thing for veterans, our Armed Forces Network, and it's based on the same principle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
so. We've got quite a lot of things, and we're really lucky actually. We've got the Firefighters Charity, which is an amazing organisation. If once you've served 5 years in the fire service, it's there for life, for you and your family. So again, it's the sort of thing where people can have residentials for rehab. They can have input around relationships, and it's great for families because we're finding that a lot of people who serve with us might have issues with their teenage children.
Yeah.
So
it's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think
So
you
it's
just
all
touched.
those sorts of things that we're doing, really.
Yeah, well, you just touched on it a minute ago, saying about the dress code policy was one size fits all, but now you're making wavelengths in terms of having, say, a tailored approach to say a uniform policy, and it's being more inclusive. But going back to the aspects of it, it's that add all them together with all the levels of support that you do see within yourselves, but also the firefighters charity as well. It's allowing people and letting people know that they're not alone in this. They are. You've got support for you. You've got support for your family, and it's what was the issues before. We're tackling that head on now and saying we need to work. We need to provide support for families because it is a distressing role. It is a distressing job being within any frontline service. And I think one of the big things is obviously the past 2 years happened before you blink and you'd miss it type of thing now, but it happened then and people went through it and people coming out still taking stock of where they are and what happened. And it's what we're finding as a service is that it could be the littlest thing that could eventually push somebody over the edge and say, I can't cope anymore. And I think we see as a service, as people coming through our service at the same time, is we see lots of key themes and key presentations, and a lot of them are all very similar to what they do. So, stress, burnout, tired, I can't sleep type of thing. And I think it's something similar to what you guys experience at the same time because you're not just a 9 to 5 service because fires don't just happen between the hours of 9 to 5. You are a 24/7, 365 service. And it's kind of you. I suppose you guys see a lot of similar emerging themes at the same time, don't you?
And again, I think it is a shared exposure, isn't it, to multiple stressors. And again, occasionally, I just sort of remind people that we're not just we're a fire and rescue service.
Yeah.
So thankfully, fires and persons hurt in fires is quite low now because of all the fire safety measures. But a big part of our work is that rescue side. So it's road traffic collisions. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of um, support to the ambulance service around gaining entry to properties where there's a welfare concern,
Yeah.
and exposure to people who have taken their own life by suicide. And unfortunately, as a service, we tend to become involved after the event.
Yeah.
So part of the role is, you know, potentially retrieving someone from the water or from a premises or some particular scenario. So in terms of that, um, as a service, we kept operating throughout COVID, like NHS and other emergency colleagues. So people were working, and I suppose for some people, they found that strange because there was a disjoint. At work, things carried on.
Yeah.
When they were off duty, they were in a house that was locked down. So the next day, when maybe or in 2 or 3 days' time, when they went back to work, they'd be out there in correct PPE, but performing the same role.
Yeah.
And for some, that created a tension because the family experience was of lockdown, of being confined,
Yeah.
and all those experiences, which didn't really connect with them because most of the time that they were out. And what we've now found really sort of post COVID is getting back into what, hate the word, but that sort of normal routine post COVID. It's taken some time for people to get their head around.
Yeah.
And also, we found that in terms of our work, some of the traumatic things that we thought might increase in COVID didn't happen, but they seem now to have appeared. So we've noticed that, for example, suicide rates there was a fear that they were going to go on an upward trend during COVID. And for us, that didn't happen. And it was felt that that might be because people were locked down, they were supported, they were having inhibitors around them. But now we're back to the open world, we're finding that's increased. So in terms of themes, something that's come back from staff is they want to revisit their suicide prevention training. They want to start thinking again more actively around what they can and can't be involved in, but also generally that they feel it's a skill they would want in their own lives. So it's a theme that's emerged, that and being physically fit again, because although people were working, it was difficult. You need to be quite physically fit to do the job that we do. And for some people, that was difficult during COVID. So those two themes really is getting back to peak physical fitness and maintaining it, but also being more aware of mental health and severe mental health conditions and also suicide. So those are the sorts of themes we're picking up.
I think it's quite similar in terms of our approach to what we have, because like on paper, COVID ended months ago, but actually realistically, we've still got policies in place to stop people coming into hospitals at certain times, to get overcrowded, to the spread of COVID. And we still get staff members who are taking stock, like you've just mentioned, stuff about, say, physical fitness or peak fitness, or one of the things we find is sleep approaches, because staff members are going back into shift work and now things are settling down. It's trying to get back, and then this is becoming an issue, so it's another build up for them. I think it's also that aspect of taking the themes and also recognizing opportunities at the same time, isn't it? I think not just for oneself, but for example, an organizational point of view, like you said there about looking into suicide prevention, getting people retrained upon that, and it's still keeping it at the forefront of people's minds. And I think, like for us, for example, stress and burnout were some of the recurring themes what we do have, and it's taking that opportunity to develop the wellbeing opportunity to become more meaningful and accessible at the same time. I think with, say, your your organisation, like you just said, it's not just a fire service, it's also the fire and rescue service. So you're attending RTAs, you're attending, it's not cats in trees, what people think it is. You're actually gaining entry into houses, say, for wellbeing checks and stuff. I think what with that, what are some of the stuff you guys have implemented as part of your wellbeing offer then?
I mean, we've always had those sort of networks that we spoke about. One thing we have in the background of that is a wellbeing group that's run through WhatsApp. And the reason we did that was it's an totally informal arrangement. So you can dip in and out and no one's going to say why. It's not seen as something formal run by the service. So, you know, that's got about 80, 90 members, and they just meet up and do things that they want to do at a particular time. And we were conscious that we didn't want to have loads of formal support structures. And just said to people, well, if you want to, we can organize this, and it can be totally sort of, that word, was it organic? You know, it can be free flowing.
Ad hoc type of,
So you're not signing up, you know, to wear a badge to say you're a member of Limitless or whatever. And you don't necessarily have to identify. You can just pitch up, be part of a mindful walk or whatever. You know, come to one of the yoga sessions, I mean, or one of the mindfulness sessions, whatever you want. But you don't have to be a member. And if you decide not to come, that's up to you. So we've got that. The other thing we've done on a more formal basis is before Christmas, I did some work with a colleague in Northwest Ambulance and some colleagues at the National Centre for the Prevention of Suicide. And so we produced for the service, for the fire service, a suicide prevention management and postvention toolkit.
Yeah.
And really what it does is it gives scenarios and examples and some education around suicidal thoughts and the sorts of things to look out for in colleagues, and then ways of managing or intervening, and other organisations to link people to.
Yeah.
So we've launched that in the service as sort of it's on the intranet and people have got hard copies. And that's purely around supporting people who might have thoughts of suicide, who we come across both in work and out of work. And the other thing we've done is this year is made a feature of offering everyone, if they want to, the opportunity of doing the first suicide first aid training.
Yeah, absolutely.
We offer mental health first aid on a regular basis, but we've been offering this year, I think we've offered 8 sessions this year, both half days and full days, so people can do the suicide first aid training. And it's just about building confidence in response to the fact that we were hearing from staff, they were having concerns or thoughts, both in terms of coming across contacts through their work, but unfortunately for some staff, it's also occurred in their private life. So we've been doing those things, and we've also continued with our themes. We usually, we do time for talk and maternal mental health week, awareness weeks and those things, really just to refresh and try and give people confidence that it's a safe place to talk and that they can reach out and talk. And I suppose it's just about reminding people that, there is a network, in our view, of quite a reasonable offer. And, they can tap into that however they wish,
I think with what you're saying there, it sounds really impactful and amazing, that the stuff that you have going on, because it's trying to predict the future in a sense of this is what could be happening, so we need to take ahead of it. I like the awareness weeks and everything, which are really good aspects. I think we've got a national calendar within the NHS of what week it is, and you've got your fun stuff like National Pie Week or stuff like that, but you've also got actual real campaigns. Like if you think about it's what we did one recently was AHP work, which week, which was essentially looking into allied health professionals and saying about the support that they do and opening up to people and saying they do a lot more than you think they do, type thing. And it's kind of recognizing that and also showcasing it at the same time, because we love a bit of jumping on a bandwagon and saying, let's get involved in this would be great for mental health, this would be great for physical health, it would be great just for people. And I think, like, I can imagine so much work's gone into the behind the scenes with yourselves, and it's great to know like services are like you're continuing to develop work streams for people. And I know you touched on it earlier on, and this is one thing I wanted to bring up was having guys everywhere. I saw that Cheshire became #2 in the most inclusive workplace in the UK. So, which that within itself is amazing to be #2. I mean, #1 would be even more better, but #2 to where you are, that is outstanding. Because you champion the best of the best within the workforce at the same time. And again, it goes back to that not one size fits all, because everybody's different. Some people might like yoga, some people might like walking, some people might just want to do things by themselves, type of thing. So it's about giving choice to people. And like you said, it's not informal, but saying you have to attend this, you have to do this. The choice is that if you want this, you've got everything else. I think touching on that then, what would be, as a mental health and wellbeing advisor for a fire and rescue service, what would be the dream?
The dream I have regularly is is that culture change. And this is going, and I don't mean this to sound trite, but a lot of the things I've spoken about, relatively speaking, are easy to do.
Yeah.
I'm not dismissing them, but what I'm trying to get by saying that is, we can provide networks and access and information. The real hard bit for me, and what my dream is that we are genuinely a safe place for everybody,
Yeah.
and that the culture is such that there isn't one person, and this is where you can tell I dream, where there isn't one person who wouldn't be sympathetic to a struggling colleague,
Yeah.
both in terms of work, life, whatever issue it was,
Yeah.
and that we wouldn't have an individual in a powerful position who might go down the policy route without acting with some compassion or some sense of the impact their decisions have. And as I say, that's why it's a dream.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, to getting everyone bought into the theme that it's safe, it's good to talk, you know, you don't have to hide away, you won't be penalised if you speak out.
Yeah.
I think that's the dream and the challenge. And that's the thing that takes so long, doesn't it? That that whole phrase of hearts and minds. You know, I think in the service we have a lot of people who are on that road with us.
Yeah.
But we still have examples of where maybe you hear, oh, that could have been done a bit better. It could have been done differently.
Yeah.
Not to the detriment of the service, but it could have been done in a different way. And the person having that experience will feel quite differently from the way they do now.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I spend a lot of time talking to our HR colleagues and some of our senior staff to just try and get across and say, look, you know, you can be compassionate and understanding and helpful. You might still have to make difficult decisions, but sometimes it's not what you say. Well, it's not what you're doing, it's how you say it and how you engage the person. The outcome will be the same, but what will be different is the way they feel about the experience.
No, absolutely. And I think
So that's
it's such an approach, isn't it? When you think about dreams are great to have and you think I want to do this, and it's so admirable, to be honest, in looking into this, because it's so easy, like you said, to put a wellbeing network together to do this, and it's finding the nitty-gritty and getting your fingers stuck in, because it's mental health can be such a dark topic in the way we work as people, just not even an organization, just people alone. But I think within itself, say for example the projects, the campaigns, everything else behind, they don't create themselves. You've got to have a handful of people together, for example, and it could take an army of people to come together to bring all of this as one. And I think it's like you said, there's lots there that you can do and implement, but it's actually taking the time out to recognize, let's not do for people, let's do with people. Bring people in and understand the level of knowledge surrounding, because it's lived experience at the end of the day, isn't it? It's them people who are going to be dealing with this or have dealt with that previously. So I think, what would you recommend in terms of speaking up for them, for example, like people speaking up about the mental health, um, just to the workplace, to the friends, to the organisations, or just in general?
I suppose it goes back to something I said earlier, I think, about how courageous you have to be, which is a big ask if you're not feeling great. So it's around, you know, me appreciating that if someone makes an attempt, it's cost them dear. And so my response should in some way acknowledge that and be a response that has an understanding that it has been a struggle,
Yeah,
that, you know, it sounds like most things, isn't it? Sort of very simple to say, you know, it's good to talk. If you talk, you know, problem shared, problem halved, you know, however we come at it. But sometimes speaking out is difficult. So I think we can give out messages that say, you know, you're safe with me.
yeah,
You can talk to me. And I do that by the way I behave each day.
yeah,
that, you know, whatever my role, if people see you as being approachable, generally compassionate, fair, reasonable, all the things
Yeah.
that engender trust, if we all behave in those ways, it does create a climate. And those, as you know, that's how speaking out becomes easier, doesn't it? Both within
Absolutely, yeah.
families, you know, if you're a family and you've got little people in the house, depending on how little they are or big they are, feeling confident to speak to their parents or those they share the house with is really important. But it's the message you give out each day that creates the environment. And it's the same in the workplace and in society, isn't it? It's the messages we give out, consciously or unconsciously, that help shape it being a safe place to talk. So, it's important that we speak out, but I think on the other side, we all have a bit of a responsibility to create the environment where it's safe to do it.
Yeah, and you've just completely summed it up there. It's that compassionate aspect. It's, to me, it's being a real person. If take the badge out of stuff, take the logos, take all of that out of it. If you see someone who's struggling or needs a hug or they're upset, you're gonna say, "Are you okay? Do you need some help? I can't physically provide you, but I could give you the support numbers or whatever you might need." And it's just been having that people approach, really, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
it's ultimately it's hand holding people. And we're not saying mollycoddle, let's mollycoddle or spoon feed. We're saying to people, be real. If you are struggling, we're here for you. And I think that's the value of, say, services like yourselves or like ourselves at the same time, coming to people saying, we're here if you need help. We're not going to force anything on you. We're just here. Just know that. And like you said, it's that messaging you give to people. That could be within the workplace or with outside of the workplace. I think there's so much of that. I think, just as say organizational point of view, we we get too heated up in terms of the jargon around stuff, or can we do this or we can't do this because of that policy. But at the end of the day, it's a real person approach and having that wraparound support as well. I think it's it's great to know that, and it's really admirable, say from your service to our service and interlinked hand in hand, to know that we can support each other when needs be, type of thing. But I do have to bring it to an end now, though. Lawrence, you've been an amazing co-host, but we have run out of time, and I could talk about this for hours. But I really want to thank you for taking the time out today and to tell us about the importance of, say, speaking up and around mental health within the fire service. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners before we head off?
Really, it's just to echo what you've just said, which is if we're there for each other, sometimes that's all a person needs.
Yeah,
Just being there for them.
That's it. It's person-centered, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brill. Well, thank you very much. For those of you who are new here, we're the Cheshire and Merseyside Resilience Hub. We provide help and support to staff members in the NHS, social care and emergency services. And you can check all the information in our bio. But until next time, be kind, because you don't know what people are going through.
Resilience is strength. Let us help you find yours.